한국에서 20년 넘게 여행 가이드 일을 한 외국인이 있다고 해서 한번 찾아가 봤어요.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Very nice. Glad you could come.
오늘은 한국에서 20년 넘게 가이드 일을 하고 있는 특별한 외국인 데이브 메이슨이라는 분과 인터뷰를 해볼게요. 시작! 안녕하세요. 유하입니다. 오늘은 우리는 특별한 손님이 왔습니다. 누구일까요? 등등 궁금하면 계속 봐주세요. 자기소개해주세요.
Thank you. 안녕하세요. David A. Mason입니다. I was born in Detroit, Michigan and grew up in the suburbs. I'm a typical Midwestern American, I would say, and I didn't know anything about Asia while I was growing up, but I became interested in high school. I became interested in China, and finally by 1981 became a backpack traveler and came over to Hong Kong trying to go to China, but China was closed. So I started going around China, countries around China like Taiwan and Japan, and finally South Korea. I didn't really know anything about Korea. This is 1982. I was 23 years old then, or 24. I first came here. I didn't know, but it became interesting. I became an English teacher at Zhongro Iga, Agoda, and YBM and the others, just starting and teaching English. And I got interested in culture, history that was really rather unknown to the world, but it fascinated me, so I stayed longer.
Did you
24.
get married that time?
No, I'm a single man. And I thought Korean girls were very pretty and charming.
They were a Korean woman?
Young man, well, I had dates. It didn't quite work out. Cultural differences, family. Back then, 80s to 90s, some Korean families were like, no, you can't marry a foreigner. More difficult than it is now. Okay. Partly because Korea was so unknown. In Korea, I found very few books in English. Many of the books on Korean history and culture by that time, 1982, written by American Christian missionaries around 1900 and were still being reprinted. There were very little modern books about Korean history or culture, and so that became interesting and kind of a challenge. And I think I did that like 5 times. 5 times I was the first guy in English on a major subject. So it kept me here. I always thought I was here just temporary. I would finish this book and publicize it and do this, and then I'd be finished and leave Korea, go to another country, go to China or something. But then there was another book calling to me, saying nobody else will write me if you don't write me. Sort of, yeah. As I became a scholar of Korean culture and history, about 25 years ago, I led my first tour, and I started guiding tours. First, I was taking tours from them. Other older expats were guiding the tours. That's how I learned about Korea. Later, by 2001, I got a job with the Munhwa Gwanggwangbu. The World Cup was coming, the World Cup in Korea, 2002. So they needed special tourism programs. So I became a government officer for that ministry, helping design new tourism. And then really they used me a lot as tour guide for VIP visitors or the ambassadors, show them around or the historic place. So I really became experienced as a tour guide then. And then after I left there, I became a professor of tourism at Gyeonggi-dae Hakyo. I served there for 9 years, and then I moved to Sejong-dae Hakyo. There was a time in the 1990s, Korean art suddenly became very popular after the 88 Olympics. And before this, still by the 80s, like the mountain spirit paintings were worthless. Only a few people collected or thought it, and people like me photographing it. But then by the 90s, it became valuable. And there became a problem of gangsters stealing those artworks from Korea, and they would take them to Hong Kong. They could sell this painting for $20,000. And so that became a problem, and temples had to start locking the buildings at night, setting up security cameras. But then sometimes, when I was there at a temple, I want to take photos of the mountain spirit painting, and sometimes they thought I was a gangster spy. I was photographing it so that later the gangsters could come and steal it. Who are you? Get out. And one time some Buddhist nun was demanding my camera. Give me that camera. They're going to rip out the film. And this is like early 1990s, and I refused. I was keeping my film, my camera. And I'd say, I'm a professor. But she chased me down the mountain and shouting, holding her walking stick, chased me, trying to get me my camera. I had to run down the mountain to get away. That was, yeah.
I think you came Korea already over 30 years? Yes?
41 years.
41 years, that's did you face any challenges or cultural difference? When you came Korea?
Gigantic challenges. I mean, one thing, Korea is still interesting to me. After 41 years, Korea's not boring.
Oh, really?
Well, it's exotically different. I'm a Midwestern American. Korea's totally different. Everything is different. And that keeps me interested. But it's also quite a challenge.
I think now it's becoming better and better compared to like 30 years ago, right?
Yeah, things are better now, and so many Koreans now speak English, for God's sake. Back then, not many, very little, and there were very few foreigners here, visiting. So it was a real challenge to find Koreans who speak English, to make friends. Working in Korea, the working style is so different from America. Working for a Korean boss, university situation, very different, very challenging, many problems, but also many pleasures and accomplishments. Often as a foreign professor at the university, they just leave me alone. I was a little isolated, but it was kind of good because I could do my class like I wanted, and they leave me alone.
One place for religious places, and one place for just tourist spots.
Okay, everybody knows the common places, but I would say for a secular thing like Jongdong, which is the neighborhood that's right behind Doksu Palace, is the original neighborhood of foreign embassies and the first Christian church in Korea, and the old schools. The Christians started a school for boys that became very important. The graduates of that school became many of the leaders of Korea, including the first president of the Republic of Korea. As a teenager, he was a student at that school. And then the very first school for girls, there was the first school for girls in all of Korean history. In 2,000 years, first school for girls. And many of the girls who went to that school became female leaders, like professors or in government or society, became leaders. So that neighborhood, to walk around there and see the old embassy sites, those schools, the boys' school, the girls' school, they are museums now, is very interesting to walk around and see what's happening. I'm interested in the holy mountains, sacred mountains, and the very greatest one is Jirisan. Jiri, it means exotic wisdom, the mountain of exotic wisdom. And it's down south. It's a gigantic mountain. Its summit is the highest peak on mainland South Korea, the very highest summit. And the whole mountain became the first national park of Korea. The first national park, and it's still the biggest national park, and it has maybe 100 religious cultural places on that one mountain, 100 of them all over the mountain. And they represent maybe 5 or 6 different religions sharing that mountain, including the Christian, Protestant and Catholic Christians have prayer camps there on the mountain. And there's Buddhist temples, shaman temple, Taoist temples sharing that mountain. There's nothing else like that in the world. And it's amazing anytime to visit there. And I'm never finished researching, visiting the temple, because there's always something new under construction. There's something new coming up. Also, Jirisan is the center of green tea.
Green tea?
Tea,
Green tea, yeah.
Nokcha, right
matcha,
here that she's
matcha.
drinking, matcha.
Matcha.
Korean green tea culture. Jirisan is the original center,
Oh,
the
really?
first place where they're growing green tea.
Oh.
It's the original place of Korean green tea. They first planted tea there 828
Wow.
AD. 828. We know that for a fact. There's a stone monument. Right now, the Hadong Green Tea Festival Expo is happening. It's a 1-month long, one of Korea's greatest festivals. That's part of Jirisan culture also.
As a foreigner living in Korea, what advice would you give to others who are interested in pursuing a similar path or living abroad?
Well, too many foreigners hardly ever leave Seoul. And this is true also of the young Koreans who live in Seoul. It's a small country, really, relatively quite a small country, but there's 1,000 interesting places. And I haven't been to all of them, even in 40 years. I'm still working on it. There are 22 national parks in Korea. It's a small country. There's 22 national parks. Started in 1967, very early. It was very visionary. Korea was only the 13th country in the world to start having national parks. Number 13.
13.
As such, this is very advanced. Every foreigner, if you're here for a very long time, that's my advice. Visit every one. And if you're strong enough, climb to the peak of the mountain. Yes, you'll have a happy life in Korea. If you only you gotta work, you gotta do your job, but then Saturday, Sunday, if you only stay in the city, stay in Seoul, you're gonna be unhappy. You'll be stressed with the urban environment. If you spend your weekend getting out to those great parks, hiking, walking, drinking the pure mineral water, having green tea, you lose all your stress. You become healthy and vital. And out there they have restaurants. The mountain food is excellent. The restaurants at these parks. That's my advice to foreigners. Get out there and see those things. It's also my advice to young Korean generation.
Are there any stereotypes about Korean that you would like to address or clarify?
Stereotypes.
Stereotypes. Stereotypes.
Well, for a long time, people thought that Koreans are rude,
Yeah.
kind of pushy.
Yeah.
Koreans in the big city,
They like pushing in the subway.
pushing and shoving.
Yeah.
The buses and subways being very crowded, and especially older people kind of pushing their way in. That's been known, and foreigners often said, "My God, these people are rude."
That's what I
Like the
thought.
Japanese are much more polite. Partly this, you got to understand. Partly this comes from the Korean War generation, where people who moved fast and pushed other people out of the way, they lived, they survived, they got the food, they escaped. People who were slow and polite, they died. And this kind of created that generation, that culture after the war. And Korea was very poor and a very desperate country. Survival. These old grandfather these days, as children, survival was very difficult. And so they're kind of like that. But to break that stereotype one more time, go to the mountains. And the Koreans hiking the mountains, hanging around, or running the cafes and the temples. Koreans in the mountains are so much more gentle and slow and polite and warm-hearted and welcoming. Actually, the same people who will be aggressive taxi driver or pushing you in the subway in Seoul, that same Korean man or woman in the mountains having a picnic will be so generous and warm-hearted, and here, share some food, have some soju, you know, don't we love the nature, welcome to Korea. They'll be so nice in the mountains and such. So again, you experience that part of Korea and you love Korea much more. I still spread Korean culture and history. I try to promote it to the world. I do a lot of tour guiding. Keep doing that, and I want to publish more books. And I want to do 7 more books in my retirement. I already have a plan, a book about Korean geomancy, the feng shui, what Koreans call pungsujiri. That needs to be done in English. My future plan. As long as I can, until my health fails. Someday I'm just going to be an old man living on the beach, reading a nice novel and kind of finishing my life that way, I think. It's, it's a nice way to go, and I hope I have a pleasant time. I have a wonderful, loving wife, a little younger than me, and she has to take care. I have a son, a very good boy and devoted. I hope he'll get married, and I'll get to hold my grandchildren in the future and love them. That'll be nice.
Today we are so happy to have Professor Mason here to share his interesting story with you guys. 그럼 오늘까지 여기 끝났습니다. 구독과 좋아요 사랑합니다. 우리 다음에 봐요. 안녕히 가세요.
안녕히 가세요.